Hi, everybody. I think this is the quietest this room has been today. It's kind of funny. I am so happy you guys are all here for our rock photography panel, moderated by Dylan Hundley. And without further ado, here they are.
Hey, everybody. Woo! Yeah, I'm used to a little bit of a different vibe. I want to make sure everybody gets comfortable before we get started. Thanks for joining us today. Okay. Hi. You ready? All right, let's go. Yeah, I told Lynn Goldsmith this before, that the way that I'm framing this discussion is inspired by her. It's inspired by you. That's how so I found this this definition, I think at dictionary.com, about what a documentarian is. A documentarian is a writer, photographer, or other artist whose work constitutes a document or documentary of an aspect of life. Today, we have with us 4 individuals who have documented musicians and the environments around them extensively and over a wide range of genres and scenes, from rock to punk to folk to new and no wave to hip hop and many other subgenres in between, offering us other humans moments to view, assimilate, and carry the essence of the subject and the space and the documentarian's view away with us and into ourselves, as great art does. And we have some great artists with us here today. Okay. First, I'd like to introduce Lynn Goldsmith. We'll start here. Lynn Goldsmith's imagery is in numerous museum collections: the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, the Museum of Modern Art, the Chicago Museum of Contemporary Photography, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, to name a few. The subjects have varied from entertainment personalities to sports stars, from film directors to authors, from the extraordinary to the ordinary, man on the street, winning numerous prestigious awards from the Lucien Claire, am I pronouncing that right? To the World Press in Portraiture, to the Lucy for Portraiture in 2022. So let's welcome Lynn again. Thank you for being here. Next up, we have the lovely and wonderful Julia Gorton. Julia started her career as the photographer, designer, and publisher of the no-wave fanzine Beat It, which offered an insider's view of the downtown New York music scene between 1976 to 1980. Her high-contrast photos, combined with graphic patterns, DIY lettering, and hand-collaged elements, capture a fleeting time with a unique style that she continues to explore with her collages, T-shirts, and zines. Gordon's photos have been featured in the New York Times, Garage, Dazed, and ID. Julia's work has been exhibited in Tokyo and London, and in New York City at the Museum of Modern Art, the Met International Center of Photography, Museum of the City of New York, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Museum of Art and Design. Welcome, Julia. Next we have with us Katie Settel. Katie Katie has studied with Jay Mizell, the International Center of Photography, and the Fashion Institute of Technology. She opened a studio in 2008, which quickly became known and awarded for Katie's unscripted and authentic images. Concert photography has led Katie to photograph iconic musicians ranging from B.B. King to the Foo Fighters to Steven Tyler. Her exhibit, Shot in the Dark, 2016, focused on low-light concert photographs, whose title reflected her own strong belief in taking chances. Welcome, Katie. Oh, sorry, we'll get back to that one. Next, we have Michael Friedman. Westport native Michael Friedman was a music business manager and producer who photographed the artists he worked with, including Janis Joplin, the band, Todd Rundgren, Chris Christopherson, Paul Butterfield, and the Rolling Stones in the 1960s and 70s. Camera in hand, he documented his experiences, but lost the negatives before printing them. Discovered 50 years later, the Lost Negatives project was started to share the never seen before photos at galleries and museums, including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the California Heritage Museum. Welcome, Michael. Okay, you've all lived extraordinarily interesting lives, so congratulations. I'd like to start very simply and just like to go along the table and ask, some questions just about the beginning. It'd be great to hear stories about how each of you all started. We all have jumping off points, and I think learning about beginnings is grounding. And I'd like to hear yours. So first off, Lynn, when did you start taking pictures, and what was your first camera?
I started taking pictures probably when I was 6 years old, and it was a baby brownie. And the moniker photographer was not one that I ever aspired to have or thought of myself as. The camera was simply a way for me as I went through the world to be able to have relationships with people, because that piece of glass allowed me to be both, it allowed me to be in it but not of it. And because my parents divorced when I was 4 years old, and my father was a very serious amateur photographer, the time that I got to spend with him alone, and to be a 4-year-old girl, and anyone here who's a father knows that when you have a favorite parent at the age of 4 and you're a girl, it's going to be your dad. So to be able to be alone with him, learning how to have these magical moments of pictures coming up on paper, I think that set the tone for the rest of my life, that tool of a camera was something that would take me on a journey, but that journey was never defined by me as, oh, I'm going to look to this as a profession. So how I became is with the help of a camera, but that's not how I became a photographer.
Thank you.
I would say I have a very similar feeling about photography as Lynn does, and I think the idea that a camera creates first a role that you have in relationship to other people. And for me, it was first you have glasses on, and they kind of protect you and separate you from people, and then you have the camera, and then you have the role. And I think my first camera was a Petrie rangefinder I bought for $20 from a teacher. And so I also never really thought of any career plan related to photography, but I really loved the role and the identity of being a photographer and seeing the pictures develop also in the dark, because you could spend more time with everybody and they weren't there with you, so you get a sense like, oh, this is a relationship or something. And I love connecting with a subject through this form.
Hi. For me, it was more about connection. I love taking pictures of people and then giving it to them. One of my first cameras was, admittedly, like the Kodak 110 or 126 in that yellow box. And, I find that pictures can boost people's confidence. And you're able to actually instill a little piece of confidence by giving that to them. And that always has inspired me. And I took a class in low light at ICP in the city, and it wasn't low light, it was black and white. But we studied low light for 1 week, and I was really terrible at it. So we had a 5-week class, and I decided to try and make that my project. And I dove in, and I thought it would be really difficult. And it was. But when I got off the train one day, I went to FTC. I saw it outside, and I asked if I could shoot 3 shows. No, I asked if I could shoot some shows there for the class. And they gave me 3 shows to shoot. And I mentioned this in my class this morning. My first thought was, I'll do the first class just to try and figure out what's going on. The second class, I'll try and put into what I figured out and make it happen. And then the third shot, I'll nail it, the third show. And once you start shooting concerts, it's really hard to stop. So.
Thank you.
I started taking pictures when I first got into the music business in New York in 1967. I was working in publicity at the time with a guy who had a little firm, and he did publicity for the Bee Gees and the Turtles and the Hollies and a bunch of English bands at the time. And coincidentally, one of my best friends from Westport, where I went to Staples, actually, he was also in New York, and he had become a professional photographer in fashion. And he was taking pictures of models, and he had a studio on the west side. And I found it to be a really great place to hang out because there were all these beautiful girls, and it was during the blow-up age. You remember that movie? Anyway, I used to hang out there, and I started getting interested in photography. And he was of the kind of reportage school of photography, which is more like the street photographers, probably Cartier-Bresson, Jacques Lartigue, some of the great street photographers. But he did it in terms of fashion. And he kind of mentored me for a time, and then when I eventually started working in management with Albert Grossman, and I brought with me the guy who I was managing at the time, Todd Rundgren, and I started taking pictures for publicity pictures, but also for album covers and so forth. But basically, I was not there as a photographer, and I think that was kind of fortuitous for me because I wasn't, the people that I was working with were my friends. I was the same age as Janice, I was the same age as all the guys in the band, and I would just take my camera with me wherever I went. And nobody was paying much attention to me as a photographer because I wasn't there as a photographer. Make a long story short, I took a lot of photographs, but I never really used them for any purposes. I mean, I just basically doing it for myself unless I needed a publicity picture or something. But it was all kind of just casual, candid, black and white photography. I had a Pentax camera. That's the only camera I ever had. I never had a flash. It was all available light. And, you know, Bruce pretty much taught me how to take a picture. And it was almost an unconscious thing that I started to put together the idea of taking a picture and seeing it come to life in a dark room and taking an artist into a recording studio and seeing the song come to life. And in some strange way, I think that I made that connection where I really got to experience in both ways the music and the artists. And so I proceeded to misplace all of my negatives for roughly 50 years. Until 4 years ago when my wife...
But don't tell the whole story yet, because we're going to get to that part.
What's that?
Don't tell the whole story yet about the lost negatives, because we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. Okay, excuse me.
No, we'll get there. Thank you. So it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it seems like the common thread between all of you is just is human connection, right? It's sort of a love of people and an interest in other human beings, right? So, Lynn, how did you find your way to start photographing musical artists?
Okay, my road, as I assume many of yours, is circuitous, so I can't just answer in a sentence or two. And because I love to sell things, I wrote a book called Rock and Roll Stories that explains the journey, and you can buy that online. But the short of it is that I came to New York really as a songwriter. And in that, I met certain people, and I had also been making short films, and I worked at Elektra Records, and I was I think the first one to make 16mm films that were used for promotion on the Doors, Delaney and Bonnie, blah, blah, blah. And then from that, I met Joshua White of the Joshua Light Show, and Joshua and I formed a company, Joshua Television, and I was a director of Joshua Television, and we brought video magnification to the Garden and also to the Hollywood Bowl. And then ABC, someone from ABC saw what we were doing, and they wanted us, and I became the director of a show called ABC in Concert, which was the first late night rock and roll TV show. During that time, I really struggled as a young woman who was only about almost 5'6", dealing with cameramen who were 50 years old and really didn't like taking direction from me, and I was pretty unhappy, so I wanted to go back, and I didn't really like doing concerts, so I came up with an idea for ABC to work with, to do a special on Grand Funk Railroad, and Grand Funk had broken from Terry Knight. They had a new manager who had been their road manager, and he really didn't know anything about marketing or thinking, and the band were, in those days, bands were really far more isolated, especially Grand Funk. And so I had the idea, because I'd written and done work with Todd Rundgren, and the press loved Todd Rundgren, that the band should write a song called We're an American Band, and I'd get Todd to produce it. And I made a deal with Andy, who I met during this I jumped, that's why you gotta buy the book, okay? Where I messed up here was, they had an album called Phoenix, and I came up with the idea for ABC that we would add a documentary aspect to the television show, and I would take the band to Phoenix House, which was a halfway house for young kids who had, were trying to come out of their drug addiction. And that was how I met Andy and got closer to the band. And the bottom line is, this is all about sex. Andy was so handsome that I just really wanted to leave ABC and be by Andy's side for the rest of his life. So I came up with the idea of We're an American Band, and I could make Todd some money because he was broke from throwing all this money into a TV studio up in Bearsville. And so I did the pictures of the band, and I did a variety of things, all with I'll work for you for free until you have a hit single in all three trades. We used to have trade magazines, Cashbox, Record World, and Billboard. And they had never had a hit single, so they had a #1 single, so I became a co-manager of the band, and then when I got tired of that, which I buried them with an album called Born to Die, which tells you, do not get on my bad side. And I decided that the one thing I've done all my life, which is really pretty simple and I don't need other people, is make pictures. And I had learned that there were magazines all around the world who wanted to publish pictures of celebrities. It wasn't just musicians. I photographed a lot of different kinds of people, and I would license them to all these publications. So that's why I'm probably richer than anyone on the panel.
Oh my goodness, thank you.
I still want you to buy the book.
You'd still buy the book. She's got another one out there, too. A new one. So, Julia, same question, please. How did you, I'm sorry, right, I just put a picture of this amazing picture of Steve Bader, which, you know, yeah, we'll talk about that. How did you find your way to photographing musical artists? Find your way to photographing musical artists.
Oh, I still haven't quite found my way. You know, I think that I have a really different, choppy kind of background where I've done a lot of different things. And, you know, it sometimes feels like it's like one chapter and then the book closes and you've never finished that book. So I worked I was studying design in school and going out at night and photographing friends in my apartment. And I really, you know, targeted people to be my friends because I wanted to photograph them. And, you know, most people said yes. So, you know, I worked like that, and I sold some images to New York Rocker and New York Rocker. And the extent of my published work is really pretty slim. I did some, you know, independent record sleeves and singles, and some of that work has had real staying power. And then I put that work aside, and so I went off and I did design work, I did illustration work, and I've, you know, sort of come back around to doing these sort of pop-up portrait sessions in different areas with whoever comes through the door. So I think that when you think about your career, it's really hard. I mean, some people have a career like, Lynn, I think your career seems like it makes sense to me. Like you had a plan and you moved forward and no?
Yeah, nobody has that, not really.
You know, I think you just go out and do it your way, and it has to be a way in which you feel like it makes sense to you. And so I agree with Mike that this work I did for myself. And I wasn't, Katie, I wasn't as generous as you by giving photos to people. I hoarded them to myself. And I did keep them for years out of sight. And, you know, in the end, it all sort of makes sense somehow.
Thank you. Katie, same question.
For me, I already answered some of your questions, sorry.
That's okay.
I was given the first 3 concerts, and then I said it was kind of took over me. After that, I was doing a lot of family photography, and all I really wanted to do was shoot concerts, because I loved it. And now I just want to say I do both, because it's equally, it's just time behind the camera that just draws me in. After I did the first 3 concerts, I then contacted the artistic director at FTC and continued to shoot there. I became one of their house photographers. And honestly, I did it for about 10 years. And each show I got a little bit better. One year I remember I shot 90 concerts in 1 year, which is a lot when you're a single mother raising 2 kids. Sorry. But it was, thank you. The thing that I found the hardest was getting access. It's very, very hard to get access now. FTC was very, very generous with doing it. And I found a method that actually worked for me. And what I do is, and it's not just for photography, I do something called shot in the dark letters. And I pick something that's almost unobtainable. Like if you guys just imagine your biggest dream and who can make that come true, and then you draft them a letter. And you write this letter from your heart, and you share your vulnerabilities, and you share why you would be good at it. And one of the hardest parts about these letters is finding how to get it to them. And when my career continued, and then I heard about the amphitheater coming up in Bridgeport. And this was during COVID. And it was like an unbelievable dream. And I found the person who was in charge. And I wrote a shot in the letter, a shot in the dark letter. And the answer was a yes. And I believe it's by taking these chances that keeps progressing your career. you know, following that dream. So that was my doorway.
Thank you so much, Katie.
I think I answered
You
all the
did.
questions you had. So I'm
It's
thanks
okay.
very much.
We're going to
and,
come back to you.
One thing that you were just talking about that I found interesting was the question, and this is kind of related to nothing, but I had nothing else to add to what the question was. So, but since you brought it up, was the difference between what I was doing photographically and what other professional photographers were doing is that I had access. These were people that I worked with, and they were friends of mine, and we hung out together, we lived together, we ate together, and we went to concerts and recording studios. So nobody was paying attention to me. Nobody was posing for me. And other photographers were trying to get to the front of the stage or to the backstage or dressing room or someplace. And it was very difficult. And unless you had special access, it was almost impossible, except for taking pictures on stage. And even the pictures that I took in concert were actually on stage because I was a manager. So I could go anywhere. Even on the Rolling Stones concert in Madison Square Garden, I had an all-access pass because I was with Janis Joplin that night. So I'm standing on the stage 5 feet from Mick Jagger. The other photographers were down in the pit. Anyway, access. I answered a question that you didn't ask, and I'm hoping that it's okay.
Access. Thank you.
Can I share a letter writing story?
Please.
Because I'm a big believer in letter writing. It was 1979, and I ride a bicycle everywhere in New York City. In college in 1965 to 68, I had a band called the Walking Wounded. And we came to New York to play and played at the Cafe Y and opened for Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And I always had a huge crush on Frank Zappa, okay? There is nothing like there's so few smart musicians. You got two in this room. But I gotta tell you, it's rare, okay? So anyway, Frank was like, so I'm riding my bike and it's Christmas time, late 1978, going into 79. We're going into 79. And I see Frank Zappa go into the St. Regis. I'm on my bicycle. I run home, I write this letter, okay? Because by now, I'm a photographer, right? I mean, I can take pictures of people and get them in magazines around the world. So I write him a letter and I just said, dear Mr. Zappa, I know your time is very valuable, and mine is too. And when I do photo shoots, it costs me for my assistants, it costs me in film and processing. So I would be making at least a $750 investment for you to come over and spend 20 minutes in front of my camera. And why would you do that? Because you could get great pictures and not have to waste your time in the future working with people who don't know what they're doing, making bad pictures of you so that you hate having your picture taken, okay? And what will happen when a magazine wants to do a shoot with you, you just tell them you'd love to, but you're busy, but they can get pictures over here, okay, that were just made. So I dropped it off. 20 minutes, get back on my bike, I drop off the letter. 20 minutes later, I get a call at home. I lived at the time, and my studio was on 61st Street between 5th and Madison, and the St. Regis is like, 53rd.
Couple blocks.
Not that far. Yep. Anyway, Frank came over. We made a lot of pictures. He loved all of him. And I basically not only became his photographer for 13 years, but he had me making radio spots, and he trusted me to do a variety of things. So that letter made for one of my most treasured relationships.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Lynn. That's really cool. Great story. And it's a good segue into the next bit as well. So these questions, this is some things I want to talk to Lynn about and Julie about. You guys have something in common that I really appreciate, which is you both have, really deep relationships with two incredibly strong female artists, other female artists that what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?
It's just an odd thing. I'm used to either seeing Lynn and Sid, who's my husband. I've never really seen Lynn and Patty.
Well,
So it kind of like, oh.
well, Lynn and Patty is a thing, though. Okay, so you have this amazing lifelong, seems like almost lifelong relationship, in collaboration with Patti Smith, and Julia also has a muse in the form of Lydia Lunch, and who she photographed extensively. And by the way, I love all of these pictures from this session of the two of you, are fantastic. But so my question to you, Lynn, starting is. And I also wanted to say too, I picked the spot too because knowing where to start with you is really hard because you've taken everybody's picture, pretty much. But nevertheless, it seems like, at least when I'm scrolling around, it looks like you've taken pictures of Patty more than anybody. And it seems like that relationship is, it looks incredibly deep and wonderful. And I'd like to know how it started. When did you first meet Patty and how did this evolve? And I know there's a book about it. It's really gorgeous.
Lisa Robinson told Patti Smith that she didn't like me, so Patti Smith called me up and told me she wanted to be friends.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, but okay, all right, fine. But you guys have been friends now for 40 years or longer?
Thank you, Lisa Robinson.
Okay, fine.
But no, I mean, first of all, it's one of the things, I told you I've been making pictures since I was a child, and because my sister was 4 years older and it's not like she wanted to play with me. I had my dolls to play with, so I would take pictures of my dolls. And my dolls were female dolls. That was before the age of Ken. And so, to be able to have a girl that can be your doll. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at Chris and Tina, and I have to say that, in doing Talking Heads, I really just wanted to shoot Tina. I mean, it's a doll. You can put, hair, makeup, and she didn't want, the blue shadow on her eyes. You were really tough about that one. But then they get willing to play, and when they get willing to play, you're playing with your doll. It's the best thing ever, So if Tina had lived near me, because Patty and I lived near each other, it could have been, Lynn and Tina. I'd much rather shoot women than men.
We're prettier.
No, it's not that you're prettier. It's that there's there's that memory that I have as a little girl.
Okay.
Of and being in a household, you have to remember, I had a working mother, and it was my mother, my sister, and myself.
Okay.
So I'm extremely comfortable with women.
Gotcha.
And it's how I kind of feel like, I'm in my family element.
Okay.
It all gets back to our childhood, so, that's a weird one, yeah.
Yeah, because it's totally ingrained, and and it's totally unconscious at times. Okay, so how does this feel, Julia and Lydia? So you've taken quite a lot of pictures of Lydia Lunch, fabulous pictures of Lydia Lunch. It seems like you photographed her more than anybody in your repertoire. And so tell me about your relationship with Lydia, please, all of us.
It's funny because I took a Polaroid of Chris and Tina at CBGB's, and I was so scared to talk to them. I was like, they're famous, and maybe I can snap off one Polaroid. I hope the light is good back in the kitchen or whatever that room was. And I got it, and I'm like, I photographed them. And I never photographed them again. I was like strangely intimidated by them, but not by Lydia Lunch. You know, and so it doesn't necessarily make sense the way things work out. And so Lydia, you know, I remember seeing her around, and I was at CBGB's watching all, you know, these sort of noisy, no-wave bands. And it was like the beginning, if you saw the fashion discussion earlier, there was this movement in London at the store Sex, and there were bondage pants and vinyl pants, and I was like, I just have to have some of those vinyl pants. But I was like, they're $45, I can't afford those. And so I got like a yard of really, really stiff black vinyl, and I hand sewed these pants, and I could hardly get in them. And when I wore them, it was like it was raining inside. They were so freaking sweaty. And I had like a zip yoke in the back and the legs zipped up. And they fit my daughter in, I think, 5th grade. They were tight. And so I wore these out to CBGB's. And I just remember thinking, I'm going to pass out here. But I saw Lydia by the door, and she saw me, but I think she saw my pants. And they were very shiny. And she's like, she definitely liked me after she saw my pants. So I had the courage somehow to talk to her and say, yeah, let's maybe we should take some pictures or something like that. And she said, yeah, come over to my place on Delancey Street. I'm like, okay. And I went down to meet her, and she wasn't there. And it was a night on Delancey Street, and I was just like scared to death. So I went and got some coffee, and you know, I kept calling her, and finally she opened up, and we started taking pictures together. And so she was, I mean, I grew up watching horror films, and I love black and white B films, and she fit that mode. And she was also, she fit in all my underwear. So it was like I was buying underwear in Delaware at the rich lady vintage, like thrift stores, and I think, I bet Lydia would look good in this circle bra. And she did. And, you know, so we had a nice partnership where, you know, you have a rapport with someone and you do a lot of work together for a short period of time. So.
Very cool.
That's it.
Actually, I mean, and you mentioned, you know, your love of horror films, and then this one, I think this one is titled Meadowlands.
Yeah,
What's going on in this picture?
Okay, this was like the one day in 4 years when I didn't go to Delaware to go home. I actually left the city with Lydia and her boyfriend, Marty, and they picked me up on 14th Street, and there's an article in my essay in my book about this. And they're like, let's just go drive to the country and take pictures. And years later, I thought, where were we? What was there? There were tires, road, factories, some marshy stuff. Oh, we were in the Meadowlands. And, you know, my husband and I drive in the city on these roads, and I'm thinking, I think it was back there. But these pictures are some of my favorite because it's such a contrast to see these subjects in natural light, you know, from my usual work. And she was just like all in. Lydia, climb up that tree. Can you climb up? Can you go a little further? She was wearing pumps and stockings and a dress. Like, I gotta love that, right?
It's a wonderful picture. Thank you. Katie, I'd like to ask you, so yeah, I mean, so you more than the others are kind of squarely focused on, you know, this size, you know, large stadium and arena photography. And so to me, this is you know, kind of a different perspective. It's less intimate in a way, but not necessarily so, but I'd like to know, like, how you approach this type of photography. What's your ethos here?
Okay. Well, first I want to start off by saying I too photographed Chris and Tina. FTC Tom Tom Club. Thank you. It was an honor. Steven Tyler was somebody that I really wanted to photograph because he's really a little bit over the top. And I knew his images would be very flamboyant and all that. And I feel like a game show. Can I have a little clarification?
No, but like, so where do you situate yourself? What kind of frame of mind do you get in when you walk into a show of this size and,
To be honest with you, if you go to the other picture where it's the amphitheater,
Yes,
and it's just the huge crowd,
yes,
this is the picture that inspires me most.
okay,
And the reason for it is this was during the Foo Fighters.
Okay.
And the amphitheater is new. We're going into our 3rd season. But the thing about the amphitheater is it used to be a baseball stadium. And it's an incredible place. It's like a chameleon because they have so many different things going on that it takes on a different persona with each one. We had wrestling there, and it was just, it's really interesting to capture these pictures. This picture, I believe, it was from the first year, and I believe it'll be the iconic shot that kind of lays the tone for what it is. And then the second year, I found another perspective to take a picture. My job is storytelling. My job is to catch the artists and all that they have. And it's neat the way it switches. If it's a rap band, if it's Phil Lesh from the Dead, it's very different experiences. So you can't really, I can't wrap around my head, but I can tell you, when you're in the pit and the band's about to come on, and you can feel it as a fan, the energy that you feel is like no other. So it's kind of taking a picture. I feel it. And then I go on to see how I can add on to that picture. Does that work?
absolutely. Yeah, there is no other energy like that one. Totally unique. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
So I was going to ask you, it's interesting, I mean, you did kind of answer, it's a two-part question. I was going to ask you, what it was like to sort of have that kind of dual role once you picked up the camera, what it was like to have that dual role that you took on yourself.
Yeah, well, it started out, I guess, because I was working in publicity at the very, very beginning. So, taking pictures was kind of part of that job. And it was groups that I wasn't managing. We were just publicists. And then when I got into management, it was a whole different thing. And I started taking pictures basically for myself because we used professional photographers for, the record company would provide photographers for album covers and so forth. But for me, it was more of a fly on the wall kind of thing where I felt like I never wanted to be obtrusive about it. So I wanted everything to be unposed and candid. I wanted only to do black and white, and I only wanted to do available light. So there were some limitations to my little world of taking pictures. Nothing was set up. I had no outside lighting. Nothing was expected of me, and I did it simply because I wanted to capture a moment or that artist in that situation, but not with the idea of ever doing a book or anything as it's turned out. And the only reason that turned out was because I lost all the negatives, and so nobody ever saw them, including me.
Well, that's one of my questions too. Where did you find them?
My wife found them in a box of old music business contracts and papers that had moved from house to house, and she was trying to clean out some of the stuff we'd been dragging around for years. And she just came in my office one day and put this thick envelope on my desk and said, "You'll never guess what I just found." And we started holding them up to the light. Of course, black and white, 35 millimeter negatives. You can't see much anyway. So we had them all scanned, and then we got the scans back, and we went, well, there's something here. This is kind of interesting. And that was the beginning of the journey. So
Very cool.
I won't keep going because I know
No, you're fine.
I don't never know where the questions start and end. That's kind of a thing I have a problem.
It's all good. I'm going to start at the beginning again. And throw one out to, again, this question will be for all of you. And yeah, whatever comes to mind, can you share well, you already shared a juicy story, but I'm sure you've got like 9,000 juicy stories. So can you share a story about a favorite session or moment? Yeah, a favorite session. Besides Frank Zappa.
It's, they either want to know who was your favorite or who did you hate. And for me, it's the same person. And that's Miles Davis.
Oh.
Miles, I came to his home in Malibu, and generally speaking, the people that I have bonded with who happen to be musicians, I bond with them because not only are they very smart, but they have a sense of humor. And I think that they get my humor. Well, I figured Miles Davis was pretty smart. I knew he was tough, but I got out of the car and I went in his back gate and he was sitting there with a group of people. And he stood up and he said, and he came over to me and he said, "I want to introduce you to my fiance." And I threw my arms around him. I'd never met him before. I threw my arms around him and I said, "Miles, that was so soon." I said, and he looked at me. First of all, I don't think he really wanted me touching him. He looked at me. He gave me that really horrible, also his eyes were his pupils were really dilated. And he looked at me like he wanted me dead. And he said, I was introducing you to my fiance, not as my fiance. I went, okay, sorry about that. So I'm just gonna look around the house to see where we should do this shoot. And he said, I want you to pick out my clothes. So I said, okay, where would you like me to go to look at your clothes? He said, I want you to go in my closet. So I said, okay. So I go upstairs, and in his closet, you would have thought the strangest person on the planet lived there. He had dwarf shoes. He had all this weird stuff, which I picked out what I wanted, and I'm walking down the stairs with it. And as I'm walking down the stairs, he says, "Girl, what were you doing in my closet?" This went on for over 6 hours, where he would have me do certain things, then yell at me. He wanted me to take all my equipment. He lived kind of on a cliff down to the beach, and I set it up on the beach, and then he said, "Why would you think I want to shoot on a beach? I want to shoot up here." So he kept doing this to me all day long. And at certain points, my assistant, who thought that I was pulling my arm back maybe to really give him a left, he would hold on to my arm. He would say, "Lynn, we'll get through this," right? So finally we had a setup, and it was dusk, and I felt like I'd been a hooker. I have never stood for such shit in my life, the way I was treated. I don't let people treat me like that. I don't see people as famous. I see people as kind people, smart people, funny people, people I want to be around, people I don't want to be around, and I did not want to be around him. And I felt a welling of hatred that I had not experienced ever in my life. And I always have music and a tape machine, and I put on, to calm myself down, Bulgarian folk music. He said, "Take that shit off." so I looked at him and I thought that was it. I didn't care because it was for, I thought, fuck the job, I'm not doing this. And I just said, you really are a motherfucker. And so he looked at me and I looked him right in the eye, right in his pupil dilated fucking eyes, and said that. And he looked at me and we stood there in a stare off. And then he said, son, get me my horn. And at that moment, because the skies had turned cloudy, that picture is in the book Rock and Roll Stories that you should get.
Right, go get that one.
In that moment with the sun coming through, and I am not a jazz fanatic. My assistants were like, Miles Davis, Miles Davis. You know, I'm like, fucking Miles Davis, you know. And so he takes his horn. I can't do it. He says, son, get me my horn. He takes his horn. He's like this far from me. And he plays right to my face. And literally, this is like the most magical moment in my whole career. My hatred, like, melted. It was so weird. It, like, melted. Tears came down my face, and I was completely sure that I was in the presence of Gabriel. I was positive. And that was like really the highest experience, maybe because I'd come from such a low point, but it was probably the most sacred moment that making images has ever revealed to me.
Wow. That's one hell of a story. Go. Wow. Thank you, Lynn. Well, Julia, or do you want to talk about this picture, or you want to talk about your favorite? This one I'm fascinated by, frankly.
I think, you know, one can take a lot of pictures, and then there are the pictures that are the good pictures. And they're good in different kinds of ways. But this, I always felt like, this is Julia. This is one of the good pictures. You nailed it on this one. Because it has a lot of, like, the composition is dynamic, and there's an action, like, focal point to it. Yet all around, you know, the main performer, there are things going on. So, I think I was the fan photographer. And there was Brian Eno, like, oh my God, Brian Eno from Roxy Music. Wow. I was just like, I've got to get this picture. And James is there, and you might not know James, but James was what they call a scrapper. So there were a lot of, black eyes and fighting, and, I would, like, get right in on the fight. So I have good pictures of him fighting. But in this instance, Brian Eno just turns right to me, and I'm just like, I have to get it. And Brian Eno is slightly out of focus, which drives me crazy. But what's funny is that people have tried to identify everybody in the picture. And there's still a few people that they're like, I don't know who this is. And people would write and say, like, who is Ambulance Guy? I'm like, I don't know who Ambulance Guy is. But it's another instance where I think Ambulance Guy makes the picture what it is. He is the key. And his name is actually like Jaguar Psychosis on Instagram. And he's like, that's me. I'm like, yeah, finally. So, there are pictures like that. But I was going to, like, listening to Lynn talk about Miles, I think, I don't know if I have any stories. I don't have any stories like that. But I do have a story about clothing and then lack of clothing. And most people that I photographed were really generous with me and very, very kind. And, so I was in senior year, I was working on a project for editorial class, and I thought, I have this great idea, because you feel that way. Like, I have this great idea. I know Anya. She's a dominatrix and a band manager, and she's got a great wardrobe and some really killer shoes. I'm going to turn her into a paper doll for my editorial class. Let's see if she'll do it. And she's like, sure, come over. So I have a lot of pictures of her shoes and her boots and her bustiers and her thigh-high boots. I was interested in all that. And then I said, well, I need to be able to put these clothes on you, but usually paper dolls, you know, they don't have a lot of clothing on. Can you, like, take some stuff off? And she just stripped right down, all the way down, except for her high heels. So I have pictures of her naked. And I'm like, oh, can you please, like, turn around? Because usually you have the paper doll from the front and the back. She did this for me, for a school project, you know, and I think, those are pictures I'll never show anyone. And, you know, I think it was not like a pop star photo or, you know, an edgy photo. She was just helping me. And I really appreciate that.
Super cool. Yes, Katie. Katie, I'm going to give you a choice as well. Can you either tell us, you want to talk about Robin Zander? Please tell us. What's going on?
I just want to add on that I think there's always some pictures that you have that no one will ever see. And that's the important part of being a photographer. It's that trust, you know. So when I took the picture of Steven Tyler, I had wanted to photograph him. And I was kind of doing research. I do that a lot. And I was researching him, and I saw he was doing a concert in Madison Square Garden. And I had a studio on Knowlton Street in Bridgeport. And while I was there, one of the owners, they had some kind of party, and the owner said to me, so what are you working on today? He goes, I love asking you guys that, because we were all artists at the party. And I said, oh, I just started photographing concerts, and it's like the best next thing. And he said, oh, you should meet my friend. And I was like, oh, who's your friend? And he said, Robin Zander from Cheap Trick. And I said, is he opening up for Aerosmith? And he said, yeah, because I had seen that. So I pushed, you know, love to do that because he had offered, and I ended up going to do that. And the way that I got the Aerosmith picture was I had permission to go shoot Cheap Trick, the opener, but not for Aerosmith. And because I was so new at it, I didn't know. They let me in, and I got to photograph the whole show, which was really a gift. And the picture that you saw up there, it's not luck. I've worked and studied a long time, but there's certain elements that all come together in a picture that make it the perfect timing. So I've become, Robin now calls me Camera Girl. That's my name, Camera Girl. Katie, no, Camera Girl. And this was at the Capitol Theater, and his manager came up to me and said, Robin would like you to take some pictures of him autographing pictures. And honestly, inside, I was like, oh God, like, how do you do that? What do you possibly get? And when I was there, I remember seeing the reflection on the table. And I just knew that that was the angle to go with. And it just made for a really beautiful composition. Along with the lights in the back, it just all works so well together.
Absolutely. Thank you. Wait, Michael. Yes, hi.
Hi.
This one, can you, yes, so this is the Rolling Stones at Madison Square Garden. About what year?
1969. It was the
Okay.
Gimme Shelter tour.
Can you tell us about this show? And what you were doing and the whole experience here?
This was the greatest rock and roll concert in history, as far as I'm concerned. And I right? Yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable. I got a call from Janice one night, and she said she wanted to go the next, on that weekend, she wanted to go to the Rolling Stones concert at Madison Square Garden, but she didn't have anybody to take her. Would I take her? So I said, well, okay. So we went to the concert, and like I was saying earlier when I blew the first question, we had all access passes, not unlike these, which allows you to go anywhere. They don't give very many of those out, especially at a Rolling Stones concert. But because I was with Janice, I had one, and I had my camera with me that night. So it was just, it was an unbelievable situation where I found myself on stage. I don't know what made me think it was okay for me to do that, but but I was literally a couple of feet away from Jagger and Keith, and the sound was so intense when you're on the stage. I hadn't even heard that kind of thing at a Janis concert, because usually I wasn't on the stage. I would be working, for one thing, so I would be either out front or on the side of the stage. But because I was able to get on the stage with the Stones, it was so powerful. I mean, every time they would play a song, it was just like, it would hit you, because the amps I was standing right by the amps. And it was an extraordinary circumstance for me to find myself in as when you say a photographer, but I just happened to be that was the ultimate fly on the wall situation. And it happened to have been, if you look at that stage, I mean, it was like the stage over at the YMCA. I mean, it wasn't a whole lot bigger than this stage. And the girls were up against the front of it, and they were climbing up onto the stage, including a couple of guys. There's a picture, I don't know if that's the only one you have, but they would try to get to Jagger, and they would climb up there, and they had 4 road managers who were doing nothing but dragging girls off the stage. And he was just like a dancer. He never missed a beat. He never missed a note. He'd be in the middle of like 4 guys grabbing girls and carrying them out. And the only reason you knew he was there because you could see the little studs on his legs of his pants. I have pictures where you can't even see him except you can see his legs. Anyway, that was the greatest concert I've ever been to, and the greatest experience I've had while taking photographs.
Thank you. Awesome. I think we can take some questions now, if anybody has. There's a microphone. I encourage you to go to that side of the stage. Anybody?
Yep, if you have a question, please come here to ask your question so that everybody can hear you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, like, I know you guys take photos of celebrities or famous people or like just art in general, but I wondered if you ever used like photography as almost like an outlet to express your own emotions and express what you felt inside, not only just people, if that makes sense. Like almost like a way to cope with any hard moments or something like that. Like, I was wondering if you ever did that, because I'm an artist as well, not for specifically photography, but for other things, and I do that a lot, so I was just wondering if you guys did.
I can say that I started to photograph other kinds of things at a certain point, and I commuted into the city for a teaching job for many, many years. And I took a lot of pictures out of the train window of the Meadowlands, like my favorite spot. And I think they're reflective of some of my feelings about commuting, because they look really like desolate and depressing and dark and moody. And then my friend Robert, who lives out in LA, he decided he would take my photos off of Instagram and start putting Godzilla and Mothra in them. And it changed the whole thing. Like, so I think I connected with someone with this work. And then I started taking pictures for Robert. Like, I think Robert will like this, and maybe like Ghidra can be in it. And so, it can certainly help you connect to people and express some of your discontent of your daily life. So, yes.
Thanks. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yep.
Hello. Love the presentation. Thank you so much. Former teacher, but I've loved music my entire life. And every now and then I'll go to a concert and I'll take a picture that is just, I think, stunning. Like the hair's up or they're moving in a certain way or their face. Is there a way to, without getting in their life, just to how would I tell an artist or their representation or representative that I have a picture that they may like, just to send it to them because I think it's so amazing. It doesn't happen often, but is there a way, like I don't want to haunt them or how, just to even to find out who their manager is or how to get a photo to somebody if there's a really interesting one?
Post it on Instagram and tag them.
See, I'm a dinosaur. I don't know how to tag, but I do know Instagram. I've heard of it. Okay. I'll ask my daughters. Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, wait. Yep. I think Brendan.
I wasn't here for the whole panel, so I apologize. Had to take a break, a breather.
You're going to be punished, Brendan.
My question is for Michael, and then there'll be a question for all of you. Michael, Albert Grossman, Bobby Newirth, are you CIA? What is your background here?
Well, I found myself working with Albert when I was about 25 years old. It was just, my wife calls me Forrest Gump.
Explain who Albert Grossman is to the crowd.
Albert Grossman in the 60s and 70s was the biggest manager in the music business. And he had, the roster that we had was Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, Peter, Paul and Mary, the band, Richie Havens, Odetta, Ian and Sylvia, Gordon Lightfoot. I don't know. There's others probably. Yeah, I'm not thinking of it. And I'm sorry. Oh, Todd Rundgren. Yeah. Well, I brought Todd in there, so he didn't have Todd until I got there. Anyway. Yeah, it was just it happened simply by circumstance. The guy that I was working with in publicity suddenly died one night, and I came to work and they were carrying him out of his townhouse on a stretcher. He was in his early 40s, and he and I had been managing the NAS and doing publicity for a bunch of groups that I mentioned earlier. And so I found, I was out of a job. And a friend of his, Myra Friedman, who is no relation, I knew from working with John, the guy that I was working for. And she called me up one day and she said, Albert Grossman, she was the publicist for the Grossman office. And she said Albert was looking for someone to help him out in New York because there really was nobody else in the office. There was a guy who handled the publishing, and there was Bert Block who did the booking of gigs, and Albert. And Albert was starting to spend more time up in Woodstock at his house. And so he wanted some more coverage in the city. And I had, not that much experience, but I had a few years under my belt working in management and a little bit in production and publicity. So I said, I'd love to meet him. I went over there, and it was the strangest meeting that I've ever had in my life. The guy was inscrutable, hardly said much of anything, and you walk into his office, and it was like a cave, a little Tiffany lamp on the desk, and he had this chair that I used to call the sucker chair, and that's where you would sit. It was like an old leather lounge chair. When you sat in it, you felt like you were a 12-year-old kid sitting on the floor because you couldn't even see him, and he just had this booming voice over the desk. And he would ask me a few questions, which I thought I hadn't answered any better than the questions tonight. But, but oddly enough, at the end of the half hour, he hired me, and he said, when do you want to start? And I said, how about tomorrow? It was just serendipity. Like I said, my wife calls me Forrest Gump because it was kind of like that in my career in the music business. It was very happenstance, and I had no plan ever. I never had a plan, and I still don't. And I'm going to be 80 next month.
All right. Do you have a question? Thank you.
Hi, Mom. So, I actually have a question for both Michael and Julia, because I know you guys were talking about like both just your work in photography, but as well as like the relation between that and like modeling and the fashion industry and a lot of like the people who are working there. When you mentioned, did you say the sex store in London? Was that, I believe, was that Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood?
That was.
Yeah, I was wondering, how has like your work like brought you guys, like, has it brought you into like relationships or connections with people in that industry, and like, how has it worked hand in hand with like photography in the music industry?
You know, my career is really like a self-guided career, so I generally haven't done any of that kind of work. When I was a student, I did some model testing and stuff was like that, and when I was doing that, I thought, yeah, there's a reason why you'll never be a model. Like, you are not photogenic, and I can't make you look good. But many, many years later, our daughter is a fashion designer, and she's like, I think you can shoot my lookbook, Mom. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she goes, oh no, I believe you can do it. So I've shot a lot of fashion-like work for her. But I think it's really, you know, one of those things is when you're a photographer and you're, you know, not super experienced in studio work or location work or anything like that, there is like, you are on a slippery slope with some greasy fingers clawing your way up. And so there's that feeling like, am I good enough? Can I do this? This is really hard. And I feel like each time I've been able to use my design skills to hide my photo flaws. And it's really interesting to work in that kind of thing, but I would never do that work for anyone beside my daughter. It's like it is way too hard.
Same to you. You said you were hanging out in your friend's studio, and he was a photographer. Like, what kind of like, how do I word this? Like, what kind of you know what? I need 1 second. I gotta think about this.
It's okay.
Were you like participating and like also like taking pictures and like getting to like know people in there, building relationships with people who like went like through the studio?
I was sort of again, more or less a fly on the wall. I mean, I had nothing to do with his business, so to speak, but I got very comfortable around cameras and dark rooms, and it allowed me, I think, to have the not just confidence, but have a direction in terms of being able to take a camera and go do what I was doing with musicians. It was, like I said in the very beginning, the photography and the music, you know, recording and taking pictures somehow completed a picture for me. I got to hear it and see it, and it would bring back the memory of it by seeing the picture and hearing the records and stuff. It just sort of was, one part would fit into the other in a way, and I just loved photography anyway. I've always really loved the idea of catching a moment that you see something happening and something tells you that's it, you know. And I think that Cartier-Bresson called it the decisive moment, and that's kind of the theory behind the whole reportage photography movement. Is, you know, to be patient and wait till you see something that you, instead of just today, you know, with digital cameras, you just hold your finger down and you're going to get a good shot sooner or later. But in the old days, everything was analog, and you had 36 exposures on a roll of film. You had to wind and focus and compose, and then you also you then had to develop the pictures in the darkroom. So, you know, it had to be more intentional than it is now, and it made it more interesting and creative from my point of view, I guess. But And it was a different world back then, you know? I mean, there was so much creativity back in the 60s, singer-songwriter era, and the producers and the record companies and the photographers. It was a whole thing that was happening in Los Angeles and New York. And to be part of that, you know, and I look back on it, I just feel like I was incredibly fortunate to be able to do that, and probably didn't appreciate it at the time nearly enough.
All right, thank you for the answers, and also thank you guys for the great presentation.
Can I just ask you for a second? Are you interested in shooting fashion? Well, the whole thing is, if you listen to the people on the panel, they were there, they picked up a camera, they started shooting something that interested them, they stuck with it in some way, and they ended up with something. And I think that there's so many ways to connect with people now and shoot whatever you're interested in shooting. So go do it.
Hi, my question is for Lynn. Lynn, we were watching Jane's Addiction at the pier one year, and you told me the most wonderful story about Iggy Pop, and then you told me stories about on the bus with the Jackson 5. Is it too long a question to talk a little bit about those experiences? Because you really were wild.
No, yeah, the picture's right here, Lynn, too. This is an amazing photograph.
Well,
Thanks, Tina.
yeah. I just wanted to address it's your son, right? Because the last thing that he asked, any success that you have in life is going to be due to the relationships that you have. So the camera is just a tool, period, end of story. It's about you and what you create for other people. So if you learn to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and you're able to provide something for them that's of benefit to them, then you'll find that you get what you want. And that has served me in terms of when Tina mentioned just talking about Jim Osterberg or Iggy Pop, because I met him as Jim the first day of registration in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan. I was standing in line next to him, and there was another guy on the other side of me who had, we call it a Jufro, you know? And my sister, who was a painter and was also John Cale's girlfriend of the Velvet Underground and was a waitress at Max's Kansas City, had outfitted me for my registration in striped bell-bottoms, which no one in Michigan had ever, I don't think they'd even seen bell-bottoms, much less striped ones. And then the guy next to me had long hair, which most of the people who were registering, 99.9% of them, did not have. And this guy with the Jufro turns around and he says, your name is famous. He says that to me, and that was my name throughout college. It was not Lynn. My name was Famous. And he looked at the other guy next to me, and he said, your name is Iggy.
Wow.
And my name is Panther, and we are the White Panther Party. And so that is the origin of the White Panther Party.
And Iggy's name.
And Iggy's name, but it wasn't Iggy Pop, it was Iggy.
Right.
And Iggy was in a band, I had a band called The Walking Wounded, and Iggy had a band called The Prime Movers, and he was the drummer in that band. But and the lead singer of the band, Michael Earlywine of The Prime Movers, really didn't want Iggy doing anything but playing the drums, and Iggy wanted to do more. So I suggested that Iggy just bust into I'm a Man, which he did, and Michael threw him out of the band, and that was how the Stooges came to be.
Awesome.
So
Okay, but wait. That's an amazing story. I heard in a documentary once that him and his parents lived in a trailer, and his parents were very supportive of him, and they had the drums in the trailer. So he was learning how to play the drums in this, incredibly small space.
Well, Iggy was truly an original. When we would play at the Grandee Ballroom, Iggy had a bigger following than my band, so he was often a headliner there, whereas we would just open. And Iggy would come out long before anybody else. He had drums that were made out of these metal trash cans that we had painted white. And he would come out from inside the trash can with a wig made out of aluminum foil. Just, things that people haven't ever really seen, and there was no one doing anything like that before. There are people who truly are originals, and Iggy was the first person I saw other than Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, when Mitch would jump off like the bar stand. He was the first performer that I ever saw like jump into the audience, literally. And, that started a whole way of experiencing what it was to be in this, to make the concert a communal activity.
I'm totally with that. I mean, total sidebar, but there were a couple years when I first started performing, before I would go on stage, in my head I would say to myself, what would Iggy do? And go from there. But wait, you need to answer Tina's question, and I've got this amazing picture here of Michael Jackson getting off a tour bus.
Yeah, this is from the Victory Tour.
Okay.
And I worked with Michael for a number of years, and he would call me up in different voices and, ask me if I wanted to go out. I don't like to go on the road for any extended period of time. I think it's pretty boring. But I will go out for a little bit, and I used to go out on weekends with them. And Michael and his brothers at that point in time, because Michael was about to leave the Jackson 5, had a difficult relationship as brothers. And Michael really was being kept separated by management, which was Wisner Demand, who Ron Wisner really didn't want any images to be made of Michael that might not be under his control. Okay. And that's like a red flag to me. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get that one. So we were coming off, actually we were walking into a show one night, and I knew that the hotel had a rooftop because I couldn't get him out of the hotel. There were only moments that I'd be able to do various things. And I don't take pictures, I make pictures. So I said to Michael, as we were headed towards the stage, I said, we're at the same hotel tomorrow, and I think you should see the magic light. And he said, the magic light? I said, yeah, it's on the roof at about 6 o'clock before we go to the show. And I said, want to meet on the roof? So he said, oh yeah, I want to see the magic light.
So much, everybody. This has been wonderful. No on for hours, but we do have to get ready for this evening's event. So if everybody could thank our wonderful photographers.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for coming to VersoFest. And remember, tomorrow is another whole day of fabulous events. Thank you.
Thank you. And also quickly, yes, share that Julia Gorton, her book, not only is she here, her book is also here.